In September 1940, a Polish officer named Witold Pilecki asked his commanding officer for permission to be arrested by the Germans and sent to Auschwitz. The request was approved. He was 39 years old, a cavalry officer, a landowner, a husband, a father of 2 children. He was also a member of the Polish underground resistance, and he had concluded, based on what was already being reported about the camp, that someone needed to go inside, not as a prisoner dragged there, as a volunteer, with a specific purpose. What he was about to do had no precedent. He would enter one of the most lethal places in occupied Europe, build a resistance network inside a concentration camp, gather intelligence on what was happening, and find ways to transmit it out. If discovered, the consequences were understood by everyone who agreed to the plan. He went anyway. Auschwitz had opened in June 1940, built from a repurposed Polish army barracks near the town of Auschwitz in occupied southern Poland. Initially a camp for Polish political prisoners, it was already a place of mass death in its earliest months. Starvation, disease, forced labor, and systematic killing were all present before the camp reached its full scale. Pilecki's mission came from Tajna Armia Polska, the secret Polish army, which later merged into the broader Home Army, the Armia Krajowa. The mission had 2 objectives: build an internal resistance network capable of staging an armed uprising from within, and document what was happening inside Auschwitz and transmit that information to the Polish government in exile in London. On September 19, 1940, Pilecki walked deliberately into a street roundup in Warsaw. The Germans were conducting mass arrests of civilians, routine collective reprisal, and forced labor procurement. Pilecki carried false papers under the name Tomasz Serafiński. He was detained, processed, and deported with the other prisoners. He arrived at Auschwitz on September 22, 1940. He was registered as prisoner number 4,859. What followed is documented in the reports Pilecki eventually transmitted and in the memoir he wrote after escaping, several hundred pages that remain one of the most detailed first-hand accounts of Auschwitz in existence. Within weeks of his arrival, Pilecki began organizing. He made contact with other prisoners carefully and selectively, under conditions where a single wrong judgment could mean death. He formed cells of 5 men each, structured so that if one cell was broken, through torture or informants, the damage could not cascade through the entire network. Over months, those cells grew. By 1942, the underground organization had hundreds of members across multiple prisoner categories. Pilecki called it the Union of Military Organizations, the ZOW. He organized mutual aid among prisoners. He gathered information on killing methods, conditions, and numbers. As Auschwitz expanded, particularly after mass deportations of Jewish prisoners began arriving in 1942, Pilecki recorded what was happening with the systematic attention of a trained intelligence officer. The reports left the camp through released prisoners, escapees, and civilians near the perimeter. The chain from Pilecki's notes to Polish resistance couriers and ultimately to London was fragile at every link. The reports began reaching the Polish government in exile in 1941. They described the camp's layout, population, mortality rate, expansion, and, as the evidence became impossible to qualify, the systematic mass murder taking place there. Pilecki's reports were among the earliest detailed accounts to reach Western Allied leadership of what Auschwitz actually was. The question was what would happen next. The Polish government in exile forwarded the Auschwitz intelligence to British authorities and the wider Allied leadership. The reports were received. Documented evidence of mass killing was in the hands of decision-makers in London and Washington from 1941 onward. What followed was limited. The Allies did not bomb the rail lines leading to Auschwitz, nor the camp's facilities. Requests from Polish and Jewish organizations for targeted action were considered and declined, on stated grounds of military priority and operational feasibility. The killing continued through 1944 and into 1945. The scale increased after the reports were received, not before. By the time Auschwitz was liberated by Soviet forces in January 1945, approximately 1.1 million people had been killed there, the overwhelming majority of them Jews. That is the documented record. It does not require interpretation. Pilecki's reports reach the people positioned to act. What those people chose to do is what the record shows. By 1943, Pilecki had been inside Auschwitz for nearly 3 years. The resistance network was real, but limited. The armed uprising he had hoped to coordinate, requiring support from outside the camp, had not come. He concluded the mission had reached its limit, and that escaping with his direct testimony now served more than remaining. On the night of April 26th to 27th, 1943, Pilecki escaped with 2 other prisoners. They obtained keys, neutralized a guard post, and moved through a camp bakery to the perimeter. They crossed the Vistula and made contact with the resistance. Pilecki wrote his first comprehensive report on Auschwitz shortly after escaping. He continued fighting with the Home Army and took part in the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. The armed revolt against the German occupation launched on August 1st, which lasted 63 days before being crushed by German forces. An estimated 200,000 Warsaw civilians were killed during the uprising and its aftermath. Pilecki was captured during the fighting and held as a prisoner of war until the war ended in 1945. He had survived Auschwitz. He had survived 3 years of underground resistance. He had survived the Warsaw Uprising. What he did not survive was the peace. When the war ended in 1945, Poland came under Soviet-aligned communist control. The Home Army, which had fought the Germans throughout the occupation, was now treated by the new authorities as a subversive organization. Its members were arrested, imprisoned, and in many cases executed. Pilecki stayed in Poland. He continued gathering intelligence, this time on Soviet activities in occupied Poland, and transmitting it to Polish leadership in exile. He was arrested by the Communist Security Services in May 1947. He was charged with espionage, illegal border crossing, forged documents, and weapons possession. The charges were a legal frame for what was, in substance, the prosecution of a man who had spent the war fighting one occupier and was now deemed a threat to the next. He was tortured during imprisonment. He was tried in a closed proceeding in March 1948, found guilty, and executed by a single shot to the back of the head on May 25, 1948. He was 47 years old. His place of burial was kept secret for decades. It has never been conclusively identified. Witold Pilecki volunteered for Auschwitz. He spent nearly 3 years inside it. He built a resistance network under conditions where a single error was fatal. He documented what was happening and transmitted that documentation to governments with the information and at least partial capacity to respond. The reports arrived. The response was what it was. He escaped. He kept fighting. He was executed by the post-war government of the country he had served. He was not rehabilitated by the Polish state until 1990. His name had been expunged from the official record. For more than 40 years, what he had done was not publicly acknowledged in the country where he had done it. The knowledge existed. It reached the people positioned to act on it. What a government or a person does with confirmed knowledge of atrocity is a question that does not resolve simply because the war ended. Pilecki's life put that question on the record. It remains there. If this kind of history stays with you, the people who acted when action was possible, consider subscribing. Share your thoughts in the comments.